Pas de soleil, pas de soleil, pas de soleil, da-da-da. Pas de soleil, pas de soleil, pas de soleil, da-da-da.
Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I'm Jada if you're new here, and I do art stuff. Yeah, I do art and I'm happy to share it with you here on my channel. Today is going to be a pretty chill art vlog where I talk about how it was planning and painting peaches. I never used thumbnails before to plan out my paintings, even though I heard from many different artists how important thumbnailing is before going into your final piece of artwork, but I never thought it would be part of my art process until this year. It's also been a great way for me to fill my sketchbook and experiment with different ideas before going into the final painting. Peaches is one of the few bigger paintings I've done over the past years. I usually paint with about half the size of this paper, but I was really excited, and this time I wanted to paint something much bigger than I usually do. The sketches that you saw previously were early initial thoughts that I had before I went into the bigger painting, so I wanted to experiment with the colors and see what I wanted to do before I went into like the final painting. In a previous art vlog that I will link in the iCards, you saw that I painted peaches in my sketchbook. So that painting I was experimenting with making the skin color blue. I'm not really sure why I want it to be blue, but I think it looks good in the practice sketch. The final painting I did actually go lighter, and I just thought about that as I was painting the I waited to start this painting until I got my new palette from Sugar House Ceramics. The two smaller palettes that I have and the one plastic one that I have that I recently showed is just too big, and it's very difficult to paint with because once I close it, all the dry paint chips will just fall out. And that's why I treated myself to this beautiful new palette while also supporting a cool small business. So for this painting, because it was so big and there were so many different elements, I decided to take one section at a time. So first I did the background because I figured that, you know, trying to paint everything else and then painting the background would just be very messy. So you always want to try to paint the biggest part of the painting first, which would have been the background and probably the figure. But I was super eager to finally paint the peach, so that's why I painted that first, because that was a very loose painting and I could just experiment and just kind of layer down the paint as I wanted to without really making a lot of mistakes. So I went with the background and then I painted the peach. Next, I am painting the figure. So this is me kind of mixing the paint and like figuring out how light I wanted the washes to be. So I've been learning a lot about gouache the past couple of months, and what I've realized is that I struggle with how much water and how much paint to use on a painting, especially when painting a figure. So when I paint a face, I'm used to watercolors where you like paint very lightly, you put light washes of paint and you kind of build up those layers over time. And that's kind of how I started approaching gouache. But the problem is with gouache is that it can get very streaky very quickly, and it's not like watercolor where, well, I haven't experimented with that, but I've never tried wet on wet method, like wetting the paper and then putting gouache on top of that. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but what I did here was I mixed a good amount of paint, and to me it didn't matter if it was perfectly like the same color or not, because skin tone varies on the face anyway. But what I did was I went very light and then I added darker layers as I went on. So this is the final layer of the blue that I did, and it did kind of come out streaky, I'm not gonna lie, but I still think it's not as thick as when I did it in my sketchbook. When I painted the face of my sketchbook, I went really light, but then I darkened it and added more layers on top of that. But for this one, I really didn't want it to be as thick because everything around her, like the peach, her hat, and the hair was already going to be very thick layers of paint, and I felt like that wasn't very flattering for the face. I'm experimenting a lot more in my sketchbook, but also with my final paintings on how to paint the face to get the look that I want, because I obviously don't want it to be super thick, but I also want it to not look super streaky as well. So adding more water makes it streaky, adding less water makes it very thick. So I'm trying to find that happy medium, and I'm slowly finding it here and there with every new painting that I make, but it's still not perfect yet. A lot of the decisions that I made while painting this piece kind of came out of just looking at my favorite artists, but also experimenting a lot in my sketchbook. Like, I originally didn't know where putting yellow on the face to kind of bring out the features of the face came from, but I really like it. I love the idea of just mixing or like putting unusual colors in skin. Well, what's supposed to be like skin in a human figure. I don't necessarily paint realistically anyway. I never really have. And so, like, experimenting with different colors on the face has always been very interesting to me, but also a great challenge. And now it's becoming a little bit of a default because I don't feel confident mixing realistic skin tones. But in my next painting, that I'm definitely going to be pushing myself to get out of that comfort zone and try to mix more realistic skin tones. So now we're getting into painting the flowers, and I loved doing this in my sketchbook, and I absolutely love painting them. It didn't exactly come out the way I thought it would, especially since I practiced before my sketchbook. How it turned out in the final painting isn't exactly how it was in the sketchbook, and I actually prefer how the flowers looked in my sketchbook versus in the final painting. But I still think that I had a level of structure for this painting, and I knew what I was looking for and going for, and I think I was just kind of forcing it instead of being loose how like I was in my sketchbook. I think I had this in my mind that I had to have everything perfect and it had to look exactly the way I pictured it in my mind. And that's not necessarily the case, especially when you're doing abstract like painting strokes like this and it's supposed to represent flowers. It's never going to be perfect, and you can never recreate exactly how it was the first time you painted it. I still think it's pretty, but it doesn't exactly look like what I was hoping for. So the hat pretty much inspired the whole painting. The hat is supposed to be a peach as well, so she has like a little cute peach hat, and then there's like the dark side and then there's the light side. So like the light side has like growing things and there's beauty and there's life, and then the dark side is nighttime. There's an half-eaten peach, there's insects and bugs and kind of decaying, going back into the earth. So that was kind of my mindset when I started sketching out the idea and then eventually going into painting. I've never painted a hat before, so this was my first hat that I've ever painted other than in my sketchbook, and I really like how it turned out, especially because I got to throw in a bunch of different colors and just let it kind of form the shape of a peach but also a hat at the same time. There is a beauty with not going very realistic. All right, so the next day, by the way, this took me days. Like, I did not do this all in one sitting. I took a break in between painting this. I lost motivation at one point, which was pretty sad because I was very, very excited to actually start painting this sketch. And when I actually started, I was really into it, and then I took a couple of breaks and I couldn't find the motivation to go back to the painting. So this has been a couple of days and I finally got to paint the green parts. So all the leaves, I finally started painting them, and I've painted leaves in watercolor and I've painted leaves in gouache here and there. But for some reason, I had a lot of difficulty painting these leaves, and maybe because I was using way too many greens, or maybe I was just kind of limiting myself with the amount of colors that I wanted to put in the leaves. I didn't really have a guide or a reference to how the leaves should look. So I was mostly going off my mental memory and what looked good to paint all the leaves. I think it really went well. And I was gonna take a break, but I decided that I was gonna paint the flowers as well. And in the original painting in my sketchbook, I actually did not have this in there. This was kind of unplanned because I realized that I made the hat and the figure a little too big when I was sketching it originally, and I didn't want to erase everything and start over. So I was thinking, what can I do to fill this space? And clovers, like clover flowers would look beautiful in this space. And I've never painted them before, so this was a little bit of an experiment for me as well. And I think it actually looks really good, and it does a really good job filling the space. However, once they're all painted, they kind of look like they're floating in the air. So I had to kind of fill in that yellow space a little bit, which you probably will see later in the finished painting. I did some abstract like greens in the background just to kind of fill up the space so it doesn't look like the flowers are like floating in space or anything. And I kind of like it. It kind of looks like the flowers kind of growing out of her hat in a way, and it's pretty cool, or like it's part of the background. It works really well, and I didn't completely mess up the flowers, so that's good. After I finished painting all the green spots and the flowers, I went right into painting the hair because I just needed to keep the momentum going. I felt like if I stopped and then tried to pick it up the next day, I just A, wouldn't have time, or B, wouldn't have the energy. I was definitely losing momentum and like the drive to continue this painting, and I think partially was because it was a big undertaking and there was a lot of little bits and bobs that I had to paint, and also it took a lot of patience, and sometimes I don't have a lot of patience. So I had to just keep going. I had to continue the momentum of painting. And I actually really like how this hair turned out, just because I'm not really good at painting hair realistically, and so I try to go the more abstract route of painting hair by adding weird colors or textures or whatever I can to make it look really interesting. After I added the last details to the hair, like, making loose strands come out and so it's not so flat looking, I went into painting the rest of the details, like the mushrooms and the little ants and other little insects, kind of, to make it look more like, rotting fruit, back to earth-y kind of thing going on. I wanted everything to kind of look drippy and honey-like, so she has honey coming down out of where her eyes should be. The hair kind of looks like drippy and honey-like coming out of like the peach hat, and then the little ants are carrying little honey drops from her. So I thought it was a pretty interesting and cool concept. And here is a look at the final painting. If you want just kind of a stagnant image of it, feel free to check it out on my Instagram. I hope this video was interesting. I hope that you enjoyed seeing a little bit of behind the scenes and my painting process of Peach, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye, take care.